Marcus, it's a real pleasure to have you on Trial Site News. We've been following your case with some interest, and we'd like to have you share a little bit more of your story, the lawsuit, these mass vaccine mandates, the implications, and maybe some signals as to where all this is going.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. And, I do have over 15 years of experience serving my country and still continue to do that today. But I'm here today in my personal capacity. And, clearly the opinions and views that I'm sharing are mine alone and do not necessarily reflect those of my employer. Um, so, I this whole movement, Feds for Med Freedom, started about 18 months ago, the day that Biden signed the vaccine mandates into effect. And it started as a very small group. There were 4 or 5 of us. It was myself, a couple of colleagues from the State Department, and some former colleagues from my time in DHS. And, we were communicating with each other and unfortunately very quickly came to the realization that nobody was going to stand up for us against these mandates. Not our members of Congress, not our union representatives, national unions, none of the institutions that would typically protect employees from employer overreach chose to side with the employees. And it's really unfortunate. In some cases, like with the State Department union, AFSA, our union was actually proactively pushing for an employment mandate, even back when in the summer, what was it, the summer of 2021, when the White House was going out to the media and publicly stating that they didn't have the authority or the interest in implementing a mandate. So we really got thrown under the bus by those who were supposed to protect us, and realized that if we wanted anything to change, we were going to have to try to change it ourselves, and took things into our own hands. Our organization very quickly grew, and to this day, we're still 100% grassroots, 100% volunteer, but very quickly grew from that very small group to today almost 10,000 strong federal employees and contractors from just about every corner of the government, and serving in all 50 states and all around the globe, doing what we can to protect our nation's interests and serve the American people. And, for us, that's really all we wanted to do. We wanted to continue to serve our country honorably and faithfully the way that we have, in many cases, for decades. And if you look at our group across the board, many of most of the people in our organization have impeccable records, highly decorated, highly awarded employees. We're the kind of people who do what we do because we love our country. And all we want to do is continue to do that, continue to serve the American people, to uphold the oath that we took when we began our careers. And, it was a rough start. We saw a lot of, and still continue to see a lot of discrimination against those who had convictions that prevented them from participating in the mandates, whether those were religious convictions, moral convictions. And, it was made very clear from day one that our superiors would do everything that they could to kick us out of federal employment.
Now let's get into some of the censorship. So and it's what you've done. Very socially entrepreneurial, organizing thousands of federal employees. What kinds of censorship? First, realize the severity of censorship that we're dealing with. Series of events where you noticed, wow, this is serious.
It was a series of events, and I'm trying to remember the timeline, but I think the first thing we were kicked off was probably Facebook. We got deplatformed on Facebook at least twice, and we're still shadow banned off and on. One of our groups on Facebook right now is shadow banned, and they don't even try and hide it. They send us a notification saying, your reach, your posts are limited in exposure now because your group engages in or provides a platform for spreading disinformation or misinformation. So I think Facebook was probably the first, but it wasn't just Facebook. We've been at some point either deplatformed or shadow banned on Facebook, on Twitter. We finally, probably about 3 months ago, were able to get back on Twitter and really started picking up followership there. Um, on Instagram, and I think what really hit home, what really tuned us onto the fact that the censorship was a little bit deeper than just social media was probably about 2 months into the founding of our organization. We actually got deplatformed by Mailchimp, and so we lost our email contact lists. We weren't able to communicate with our members. And they said the same thing, that we had violated community standards and that we were spreading misinformation, when in reality, the only thing that we were using those email lists for was informing those who had signed up or reached out to us about their options for pursuing legal remedies. We weren't posting news articles. We weren't posting anything, that could even remotely be considered conspiracy theory-ish type stuff. We were just saying, hey, here are your legal options. Here are the law firms that have stepped up to the plate and said that they're willing to take on these cases. If you want more information, here's how to get involved. And just because of that, we were deplatformed from Mailchimp, lost our email contact list, and we eventually transitioned to another provider. But that set us back weeks or even months, and similar things like that happened on many of our other platforms. And not to even touch on sort of the legacy media. Nobody wanted to talk about our efforts, our cases. It was all spun to the benefit of those who were pushing the mandates. And even to this day, you see very limited coverage in any of the legacy media outlets about what we've done. We did have early on some interviews with some of the more left-leaning outlets, and they did everything they could to try and trip me up and trick me into saying something that wouldn't have been representative of what we were trying to do and accomplish as an organization. And when they realized they couldn't get that soundbite that they wanted, they ended the interview and didn't include any of the things that we had shared when they published their pro-mandate pieces.
Wow. Well, just, briefly, Marcus, first of all, the MailChimp story, that's heavy duty. Okay. That's simply a cloud-based infrastructure you use for basic communication. So this is clearly, way crossing the line. Okay. You're just an organization that's representing federal employees. So now, importantly, the unions, I just like some perspective. Now, traditionally, unions tend to lean left, liberal to left, okay? And typically, they're all about protecting employees, especially from big corporations or federal administration and management. These is traditionally what unions did. What's your sense of why the union in this case just dropped all of that? I mean, is it just that they believed, hey, this is safe, this is how we're going to save lives? Or what's your sense of this phenomenon that's unfolding?
Well, before I dive into the unions, I want to back up just a little bit on the
Sure.
censorship piece. For me, the most chilling part of censorship is the fact that now it's coming to light through the Twitter files and some of the other reporting, some of the other information that is now being, coming to light, that much of that censorship was being done at the behest of or at the suggestion of U.S. government entities, the same government entities that were named as defendants in the lawsuits that we were filing. And it should, give any American pause to think that their government is involved in encouraging social media companies or other tech companies to suppress the free exchange of ideas. And that's what democracy is about, right? It's about having a healthy, robust debate on the merits of various views. So it's unfortunate that things played out the way they did. And our hope is that will be corrected. But on the unions, it's interesting because pretty much across the board, the unions, within a couple of days of the mandates coming out, published communications to their membership saying, you know what, we've looked into it. There's no real legal avenue to push back on this. We're willing to, in some cases, they offered to help the membership with religious accommodation requests, medical accommodation requests. But by and large, the message that they conveyed was, this is legal. There's no way to push back on it. You need to just go along with it, get on board. And what came to light after some time was that there had actually been meetings between administration attorneys, I think DOJ, but don't quote me on that. They had actually called in the union attorneys and shared with them, hey, these are the legal bases for the executive orders, and this is the case law that we believe supports our position, so don't waste your time trying to fight this. And the union said, okay, sounds good.
So basically, the union it sounds like they were just instructed, there's nothing you can do, and they had no fight in them for their employees, which is their job.
Right.
That's why
it's unfortunate. And a number of our members now have active legal filings against the unions for their failure to represent on this issue. So we're looking forward to seeing how those play out.
That's an important point. And I appreciate, just back to censorship, thanks for bringing up the Twitter files. And we agree with you. The federal government has clearly been directing this censorship, and it's a constitutional violation as far as we're concerned. So unions show no fight for their members. So you're on your own. So
I do want to inject just a little bit of information. So the national unions completely sold us out. Nobody was willing to stand up and fight for us. However, there were a couple of local unions who bucked the national leadership and said, no, you know what, this is wrong. We're gonna fight this. Our members want us to fight this, and we're gonna support them in that. And some of those unions actually joined as named plaintiffs in the lawsuits that were filed. So, I'll give kudos where it's due, and I will say that there were, an unfortunately small number, but there were a number of local unions who did listen to their membership and who did actually stand up and fight for them.
So it sounds like the more local the entity was, the more proclivity to potentially be independent, or at least consider some independent thought, versus the national was just swept away with the COVID response trade winds, or hurricane winds, maybe more appropriate. So, in building this organization, I mean, just for others that might be contemplating similar, types of processes, what did you find? How did you? 10,000 is a lot of people. It's not very long. I mean, how did you, at a high level, how did you go about building this organization with your colleagues?
I mean, it was all word of mouth. We weren't allowed to advertise. We were blocked from advertising on any of the social media pages. And so it was just word of mouth, people sharing with their coworkers, hey, here's somebody who's willing to stand up for us. And, it went from there. And I know 10,000 is a lot, but it should have been 100,000, because we know that there are at least 400,000 direct hire employees who, to some extent, had objections to the mandate and didn't participate in it. And that doesn't even count contractors, which would be an even greater number. So, and then add into that and add to those numbers the people who were vaccinated, who were forced to get vaccinated against their will. And, we're seeing sort of a second wave of members join our organization now, and that is those who were forced against their will to get vaccinated, in many cases having to violate their religious convictions to do so, because they were under so much pressure and so fearful that they would lose their livelihoods, that they wouldn't be able to provide for their families, that they wouldn't be allowed to do their jobs to continue to serve their country. And it was even harsher for our uniformed brothers and sisters in the military. But it really is a shame what was done to people who put their lives on the line to defend our country, and how they were treated through this whole thing.
Oh, most certainly. So, you through word of mouth, which is amazing, and I understand it should have been many, many more if you would have had access to social media and the different communication channels. I mean, they even stopped your chimp tool, which is just insane. Now, let's talk about the lawsuit. You filed, and it's been a weird kind of back and forth. Trying to follow what's going on is in itself very interesting. Can how did the lawsuit start? What did you easily find lawyers to help you, or was that a process? And then, kind of take us through the life cycle of the lawsuit, which is pretty interesting.
Well, it was a pretty arduous process. And, in full disclosure, I'm not an attorney. I don't have any sort of legal background, other than having some experience in law enforcement. But not an attorney, and none of this is legal advice. It was a rough start. I think we probably called 50 or 60 law firms before we found a couple who were willing to even talk to us about our case. And some of them were open and transparent enough to say, we can't risk our reputation in the legal community. We can't risk, losing other clients who do support the mandates. And, when you put all that together, it really was sort of a David versus Goliath effort, because we couldn't find anybody to represent us. It took weeks to find a firm that would even talk to us. We did eventually find a couple of firms who were willing to take our cases. And, the case that ended up getting the injunction down the Fifth Circuit was picked up by Boyd and Gray and Associates. And they've done a fantastic job. It started in Galveston, Texas, at the circuit court, the district court. And that judge ruled in our favor, and then it went for the injunction, the emergency injunction. And then it went up to the Fifth Circuit, where there was a panel of 3 judges who heard our case and decided to set aside the injunction. We filed an appeal on that, and it ended up being selected to go to an en banc hearing, which means that all the judges in the Fifth Circuit sat in one room at the same time to hear oral arguments on our case. And I think it was 17 judges, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And by the way, Marcus, that's pretty rare. So, I mean, to have an en banc, it doesn't happen all the time.
It is. I think I heard something like 1 in 600 cases are actually given permission to go en banc. So it's extremely rare. But, it shows the seriousness with which the judges took their responsibilities, and the seriousness of the allegations that we're raising in our lawsuit. We had those oral arguments in September of last year, and then just got the decision let me back up. We got the injunction initially in place in January of last year, and that has remained in place ever since, through our appeals. Finally got the decision for the en banc hearing just a couple of weeks ago, and are thrilled with the decision that came out of the court. I think it's pretty strongly in our favor, and at this point now it's back with the judge in Galveston for further action. And my understanding is at this point the case has to sort of go through the non-emergency standard process. So I think at some point there will be oral arguments in our case again. And, the court will have to rule on not only the injunction, but also the merits of our case, the case itself, and the arguments that we're making. So I don't see the fight ending anytime soon. It seems like the administration, the Department of Justice, doesn't want to give up on these cases. And they've even said, in some cases, we need to win this case so that we retain this power for future instances that might come up. future pandemics. And I think from my perspective, at least, we do need to continue to fight it, and it does need to be heard all the way through because, we need judges to look at this and to say that what happened was wrong, it was unconstitutional, it was a violation of our rights, and to put to rule on it in a manner that prevents this from being done to us again. Because if that doesn't happen, then there's nothing to prevent the administration from implementing another mandate, 2 or 3 months down the road. And along those same lines, we're hoping that Congress will act and put protections in place for employees that ensure that people are never again forced to choose between their faith and their job, their livelihood.
And that's a really it's an incredibly impressive story because you and colleagues essentially started this organization under incredibly onerous conditions. You were able to find a law firm. You filed a lawsuit. The first injunction actually was in your favor, if I understand this correctly, which is pretty darn impressive. And now I did have a question of that 3-panel bench on the bench that preliminary. They came back and had a 3-panel hearing and shot down the first preliminary injunction. Was there any, and I want to try to, we're apolitical, we're not partisan, but was there any noticeable politics in this, Marcus, where that the 3-judge panel had some kind of agenda, or is it just they looked at it differently, or was there any kind of political partisan?
I want to be careful what I say as well.
Of course,
I think in the Fifth Circuit there are only 3 or 4 judges who were appointed by Democrats,
okay.
And it's just public information. You can go and look up the composition of the panel that we had, and those judges were appointed by.
Understood. So basically, though, I mean, you're basically winning this thing right now, as we understand it, which is incredibly, impressive. So
we are, and but for us, even if we win in court, even if the DOJ were to appeal it to the Supreme Court right now, and the Supreme Court were to take it up and to rule in our favor on all the issues, all the questions at hand. For us, it wouldn't be over, because over the last 18 months, what we have seen is, we've seen colleagues have their security clearances revoked. We've seen them be kicked out of federal employment, banned from federal employment. We've seen federal agencies create brand new databases specifically for holding the information of those who didn't comply with the mandates for whatever reason. And when those databases were announced in the Federal Register, they actually openly stated in many of the cases that this information may be used for the adjudication of security clearances. And so, until those databases are dismantled, until people are reinstated to their employment status, until, we address the harassment and the coercion that happened, until we take care of those who were against their will forced to get vaccinated and subsequently are now suffering from vaccine injuries, or in some cases, have life-altering medical conditions that prevent them from ever working again. Until we do what we can to correct all of those wrongs, the fight's not over.
I wanted to ask you, and if it's not answerable, just that's fine. I'd like your opinion, Marcus. I mean, look, we understand there's a dangerous virus. It seems to be getting more mild, but the vaccines are not sterilizing. They don't stop transmission. They've helped, but increasingly, it's questionable how much they're helping. I ask you, is this really just about control? I mean, is this some kind of evolving, phenomenon where the federal government, whoever's in power, wants more control? Is that at its core? Is this just a battle between, our rights, our autonomy, and control? It seems like at the core, that's what this is about.
Well, you have to wonder, when this all started, the justification was you have to get vaccinated to protect the public. You have to get vaccinated to protect your coworkers. And then when it became clear very quickly that vaccines didn't prevent transmission, then the argument became, well, you have to get vaccinated for yourself, to protect yourself, to keep
Yeah.
yourself from getting COVID. And then we found out that it doesn't even prevent you from that. And then the argument now where we stand is, well, you have to get the vaccine so that it reduces the severity of the symptoms, so maybe you won't have to go to the hospital. And they're you know, I think that the further along we get, the more the science, the more the censorship abates, where those voices who have been warning about this from the beginning can be heard, questioning how safe the vaccines are, how effective the vaccines are. For a lot of people from the beginning, they saw that this was a grab for power. And, once you give away a right to the government, it's impossible to get it back, nearly impossible. And the concern is, if the justification for the mandate now is that you need to do this to protect yourself, you need to do this so that your symptoms aren't as severe, what's to prevent the government from implementing other mandates on other issues to say, we need a workforce that isn't going to be out for medical reasons? What's to prevent the administration, any administration, this administration, a future administration, from saying, you know what, when employees get pregnant or they have kids, it takes them out of the workforce too much. So we're going to limit federal employees to only having one child, because if you have more kids than that, it takes you out of the workforce too much. It's has a negative impact on operations. So if you want to be a federal employee, you can only have one kid. The question of fundamental bodily autonomy, bodily autonomy used to be universally recognized around the globe as a fundamental human right, a basic human right.
Right.
And somehow over the last 2 or 3 years, we've lost sight of that, that idea. And I think we need to go back to that, because a lot of those who were pushing most fiercely for the mandates were those who, on other issues, are very vocal about bodily autonomy, about my body, my choice. And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
when you're looking at a medical decision that can alter your body permanently, it's not something temporary that you can do and then undo. You can't take the vaccine out once you leave work, or once you retire, or once you quit your job. It's irreversible. And so medical decisions like that are private medical decisions that people should make in consultation with their personal physician. But as far as I'm concerned, the federal government, or really any employer, doesn't have any business injecting them into that process and telling you what can and can't go into your body, especially when it doesn't impact those around you.
What, from your standpoint, is there anything that you need help with, resources, anything you want to get out there for the public?
Well, there's a few things, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're a grassroots organization. We did finally get 501c3 status a couple of months ago. And so people can donate to our organization. Those donations are potentially tax deductible. There's a few things we need. One, we need members. We need people to help spread the word. We need other federal employees to know that they're not alone. And I know that a lot of people, even other federal employees, are shocked when I tell them that the mandates are still in place, that this is still a thing. But like I said earlier, until we undo the damages that we've done, the fight's not over. So we need people to help spread the word. We need those who are supportive of our efforts to join our organization. They can go to FEDS4 MedFreedom, fedsformedfreedom.org. And there's a link there to join us. We need donations. I think over 90% of our income goes directly to legal efforts and helping spread the word about our organization. We have very minimal overhead. We're all volunteer. None of the members of the board or our volunteers or our leaders. None of us are getting a salary from this or any other sort of financial compensation. So we need donations. And again, people can go to our website and do that. And then, we also need people's support as we move into the next phase of our fight. So for us, part of that accountability, part of correcting the damages that have been done is that, we don't believe that the bureaucracy we have today is as reflective as it could be of the political diversity of our country. And what we saw through the mandates was a bureaucracy who overwhelmingly supported, without question, the decisions that were made. And leaders, and I use that term lightly, loosely, leaders at the mid to senior level were unwilling to risk their careers to stand up for what, in many cases, they knew in their hearts was wrong. And so, one of the things we're fighting for as an organization, one of our long-term goals, is to, work with Congress and other stakeholders to try to reform the bureaucracy, reform the civil service, so that we get to a point in the future where the civil service, the people that serve the American people, are truly reflective of the diversity of our country, of the geographic diversity, the political diversity. We hear a lot of talk about diversity these days, but political diversity is sorely lacking in our government. And so, we want a government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people, and we'll continue to fight for that. If we want, from our perspective, we've pulled together this group of amazing people from within the federal government who are willing to, and have proven over the last year and a half, that they're willing to put what they know is right ahead of financial considerations, ahead of professional considerations. They're willing to risk their careers to stand up for the rights of the American people. And so we're hoping that we can capture on that patriotism, on that energy, and take this to the next level and build a government that is more reflective of our country. And in doing so, prevents what happened to us over the last 18 months from ever happening to us again or to future generations. So we can't do that without support. We need people's donations of time, of money. If you sign up to be a member on our website, you'll get a welcome email that tells you some of the other things that you can do to help us as an organization, help plug you in. We have lots of opportunities for people to volunteer and help us spread the word and push on these various lines of effort. So anything that people can do to help us is always appreciated. And you can find all that information at our website. That's ForMedFreedom.org.
Well, we want to thank you. We're following this story, your organization, your members, and we've got some good tips for other things to research. So we're grateful for having you come on board. We're going to make some connections for you and try to support you the best that we can. Marcus Thornton, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with Trial Site News.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.